Hello there everyone, how you doing today? I hope you're all well. Today we're going into r/AskReddit, where the people of Reddit answered the question called Lawyers of Reddit, what was your hold it moment where you knew you would win your case? If you enjoy these stories I will provide, like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below with your thoughts or your own stories. Now, without further ado, let's get started, shall we? Not a lawyer, but I got robbed at gunpoint in my home. Long story short, he would have gone to prison anyways, but the kicker is that the shoes he wore to court were the same shoes he stole from my house. The judge asked if I wanted them back. I said yes. Judge made him take them off in court and walk back in socks. I donated the shoes. It was more about the principle. I had a client charged with battery. The alleged victim didn't really support the prosecution's case, and in any event was reluctant to testify. They still had another witness, though, and she said that my client was hitting the alleged victim, so it wasn't looking great. The prosecutor and I were talking before court started, hanging out by the courtroom doors, when the witness walked in. She looked right at my client, who was sitting not 5 feet from me, then scanned the room and said, "Where is insert client's name?" The prosecutor and I looked at each other for a minute, and then he said he needed to check on something. When I saw him a few minutes later, he told me he was dismissing the case. I was testifying for the defense. A young man had been arrested for assaulting a police officer, allegedly throwing bottles during some unrest in Oakland, following the verdict in the trial for a cop who shot Oscar Grant in the back on the BART platform. I had been there filming stuff, caught his arrest on video, and his brother found my footage on YouTube and asked me to testify. I had only seen bottles being thrown from this one corner of the parking lot, from behind me, with the bottles flying over my shoulder. The defendant was in a group in front of me. On the stand, the prosecutor seemed to think that I knew the defendant, and there was basically committing perjury on his behalf. I explained why I had been there that night, that I had never seen this guy before. I hadn't been coached by the defense, and hadn't been paid other than a small amount for my travel and time. Finally, exasperated after much back and forth, the prosecutor says, "Well, if you don't know the defendant, why are you here testifying for him?" I thought for a moment and said, "I guess I just wouldn't want an innocent man to get convicted for a crime he didn't commit. Is that so odd?" He got visibly flustered and quickly moved on, trying to insinuate that if I didn't know him, how would I have known to be looking in his direction to see whether he was throwing things? And I tried explaining that if you're looking at a group of random people, and one of them throws something, you'll naturally fixate your attention on that person. But because nobody in the group threw anything, there was nothing to notice in the first place. It looked like the police just grabbed him at random. They rested, the defense attorney bought me lunch down the street, and he got a call from his colleague saying that the jury took all of 10 minutes to return a not guilty verdict on the assault charge. They said my response was legendary, though, and that no attorney should ever ask a question they don't already know the answer to. This guy seemed to have a narrative about a prior relationship to the defendant that he assumed was accurate and was trying to call my credibility into question. When the petitioner's attorney called me my brother's name on the stand, my brother is a POS, and I don't associate with him anymore, but that dude has a lengthy criminal history and it pops up on traffic stops occasionally. So I was in court over custody of my oldest, and her mom's attorney was trying to paint me as a hypocrite for being an addict. I denied it all on the stand, and he said, "Now, James, I must remind you that you were under oath, and by denying this you're committing perjury." I stared him dead in the eyes and said, "My name is Bill. James is my brother." Even the judge laughed at him, and the only reason we didn't bring it up sooner We knew he submitted it as evidence, but had no idea why. Was because I really wanted to know what he was up to with it all. We had some huge issues with the landlord trying to enter without letting us know beforehand, not responding to fix issues, and very aggressive when talking with us. When he decided to sell the place, he didn't check with us about the visits and just showed up randomly with potential buyers. We told him to get lost and he eventually left, but he called us the same evening to threaten us. We sent emails to remind him of our rights as tenants, and he answered by threatening us some more in an email. We eventually end up in small issues court. We're not from the US, I don't know the name. And he fabricates a story about how we're terrible tenants and we try to discourage buyers. We just showed the judge the emails as well as open complaint to the police. We called a few days earlier. The judge couldn't believe it and gave him a formal warning, gave us 3 months free rent. In the end, the guy just used a real estate company to sell the place. All went smoothly and we still live there with lovely landlords that aren't completely bonkers anymore. My client was riding his motorcycle on a relatively calm street when a guy exited his garage without looking and run over him. In deposition, the guy brought a witness that was with him on the passenger seat. The whole time, the witness maintained that my client was driving too fast and that there was no time to brake the car. I asked him the same question a few times in different ways, making him tell the story again. In the fourth telling, already a bit frustrated, he let it slip. Look, we already told you. We were exiting the garage, and as soon as I lifted up from getting my cell phone on the car's carpet... Wait, so you didn't even see the crash? There was no coming back from that. At this moment, he knew he fucked up. Parent termination case I was prosecuting. Dad went on and on about how he has changed his life around and worked the AA program. I asked him what step he was on, and he proudly proclaimed 3. Asked him what step 3 is, and he had no idea. And we asked him what step 2 was. Again, no idea. His parental rights were terminated. It was my 3rd month of practice. I was in family law at the time, representing a mom in petition for a restraining order against the boyfriend/dad. At issue in the broader case was child visitation, custody, support, and so on. But today's hearing was just on the RO. We had pretty good facts, but it was mostly based on testimony of the parties. My client was way more reputable as a witness, so I was feeling confident. 10 minutes before the hearing, my client shows up. I give her a last-minute prep on what to expect, and then she says, I'm glad I'm going through with this. I can't deal with it anymore, and he's just getting worse. To top it off, he left me a drunken, ranting voicemail on Saturday. Do you have your phone with you, ma'am? Why, yes, I do. We play the voicemail, and it's a full 2 minutes of the ex-boyfriend screaming stuff like, I should have frickin' killed you when we were together. You were always such a female dog. I hope you burned to death in a fire. I didn't have time to ask her why she hadn't said anything to me about the voicemail before the bailiff called our case. We sit. The judge asks if either side has additional evidence, and I ask for permission to play the voicemail. The ex-boyfriend, who didn't have an attorney, didn't object, so I played the whole nasty 2-minute rant in open court. The judge goes, We're going to have a brief recess before I issue my ruling. If the parties want to meet and confirm the call, they are welcome to. The boyfriend knew he was screwed. We settled the whole case then and there. My client got her wish list in terms of custody, supervised visitation, child support, and the restraining order to boot. In court for a restraining order, My ex was adamant he had not nearly killed our daughter, and that he did not, in fact, break into my house and hold a gun at me, point blank, the week prior. I was just a liar who wanted to keep his child away. When told I was asking for a full indefinite order, which is 0 contact ever, he said to his lawyer, "If this bitch gets that order, I'm going back to her house and I won't fail this time." Sadly for him, the microphone was still on. Oh boy, what a dumbass. When I practiced insurance defense, I was handed a file to take over of a slip and fall. The guy tripped on a hose, tore his ACL. The partner had taken the guy's depo already, so I read the transcript. I'm a Michigan football fan, watched every game for 20 years. This guy testified he was the starting safety for a certain rival in certain years. Also that he graduated with a double major that doesn't exist at a school he mentioned. I immediately knew this was false. The partner didn't understand. We dug deeper. He lied about so much stuff unrelated to the fall for no reason. Eventually found his high school records from football injuries of head trauma, knee injuries, and a slip and fall injury a few months after ours. He also testified he rehabbed an ACL injury after 1 month. Motion for the fraud on the court filed, and it was immediately settled. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm currently in a custody battle. My mother is saying I can't be trusted because I've been refusing to take our child to the therapist. The therapist testified I couldn't bring our child in because the therapy must have both parents' consent, and the mother has retracted consent. Your Honor, he won't bring our child to a therapist because he can't. And why is that? Because, Your Honor, I won't let him. Very abbreviated. I was prosecuting a convenience store owner for luring a young girl who regularly came to the store back to a part of the store to grope and fondle and kiss her. This was child enticement. It was only section of the store without surveillance camera coverage. They were in the back room for about 2 minutes and 17 seconds, per the timestamp on the videos. Of many arguments the defense put on, one was there was no way there was enough time for anything to happen. In my rebuttal on closing, I asked the jury to imagine what could happen in that room in that amount of time. I asked them all to close their eyes while I timed out 2 minutes and 17 seconds on my watch, in silence. After about 60 seconds, 2 of the jurors started crying. I knew it was going to be guilty right then. I sued a former employee for $3,500 in unpaid wages. It was a slam dunk. I had a letter stating that my salary would be, versus pay stubs that were less. In my opinion, so I didn't bother getting a lawyer to save on fees. Turns out, the company thought they could try the same strategy. I show up to court, and the manager of the local office is there, with an affidavit from a CEO saying he's allowed to represent the company in court. The judge asks him, "Are you an attorney?" "No, just an employee." A company can't have pro se representation. The judge immediately ruled in my favor, and it felt freaking fantastic. I worked on a case involving defective processors. In discovery, we got emails from the defendant's engineers that had worked on the processors. They were in an Asian country, but the emails were in English because they were going to US executives. One of the more senior engineers basically laid out the exact defect we were suing over, explaining what the problem was and why it was their fault, and finishing with, "This is big problem. We ship crud to customer." Needless to say, we hit them over the head with that in mediation, and they settled shortly after. I represented an elderly Indian couple who didn't speak English very well and owned a rental property. They had a tenant at the time who had not paid rent in over 6 months. They had tried to evict her on her own, but when they got to court, the tenant produced some handwritten notes which they had given her the year prior, thanking her for payment, but they failed to date the notes. Of course, the tenant added recent dates herself. The tenant also produced a partial certified check receipt, but most of it was illegible. Anyway, because of their poor English, they had difficulty understanding the questions and giving intelligent answers, so they lost the initial case. They hired me to help address all of the various lies the tenant was putting forth. Anyway, we refiled. I had my clients pull the banking records, so we could show the date that the certified check was actually deposited into their account. The plan was simple. Let the tenant make the same arguments, and then present the banking statement showing the deposit date. My clients also found a photocopy of one of their notes, but it was undated, unlike the copy the tenant presented the last time. Well, when the judge finally understood that the things the tenant had presented occurred the year before, his cheeks turned bright red, and he asked the tenant, "What year did you make the payment?" The tenant started saying something like she couldn't be exactly sure when, and then the judge cut her off again, and in a very loud voice said, "What year?" Needless to say, the clients got their eviction granted. When the tenant arrived at court, I watched as she got out of her car, walked to the back, and pulled out a wheelchair and proceeded to stay in that wheelchair until the case was over. Once the judge left the courtroom, she folded up the wheelchair and carried it to her car, mumbling that she hates freaking lawyers. Anyway, that was a very satisfying day. That's the end of today's video. I hope you all enjoyed. Remember to like, subscribe, check out my links down below in the description, and leave a comment with your thoughts or stories in the comments. An emoji will do just fine too if you have nothing to say. Anyway, I'll see you all later. Hasta la pasta.